Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Back in Time Watch Restorations. My name is Wayne and thank you so much for tuning into the channel. In this episode we're going to be working on this beautiful JLC dress watch. This is reference 2285. The watch is powered by the JLC K800 17 jewel manual wind movement, and the watch was manufactured from the early to mid 1960s. Now I picked up this watch on eBay about a year ago. It's been sitting in my collection waiting to be serviced, but it's time to breathe some new life back into it. Now, I must say I'm a little excited about this project because I have a lot of admiration for this watch brand. JLC is known for making very high quality watches, and they're known within the industry as the watchmaker's watchmaker. And that's because not only do they make their own watches, which are high quality, but their movements have quietly powered some of the most prestigious watches over the years. And this includes watches from Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron Constantin. And if you know anything about horology, those are some of the most prestigious watch companies in the industry. Yeah, the more I look at this watch, the more I admire it as well. It's got a very slim profile on it. And I'm thinking once this watch is restored, it's going to see a lot of wrist time. So let's get started on this. So the first thing we need to do is to remove the case back. And this watch has a snap-on case back, which means I'll use my case knife to remove it. But I have to find the right spot on the case to insert the case knife. Usually there's a little indentation that you can use to press the case knife into. Yeah, I found it and I've pressed it in, and the case back it's coming off, but it's stuck a little bit. So let me see if we can move this around a little bit and get that removed. There we go. Okay. And I'll press down on the crown to get the dial and the movement removed from the top of the case. And the watch hands, at least the minute and the seconds hand, were loose when this shipped to me. So we'll go ahead and take those with my wooden tweezers and we'll set those in this protective box. But let's take a quick look at the dial before we remove the hour hand. This is a really cool crosshair style dial, which was common for watches in this time period. But you can see that this watch is showing a lot of signs of aging. And in the vintage watch collecting world, this is commonly referred to as patina. And in my opinion, this is on the extreme end of patina, just not to my liking. Believe it or not, there are some vintage watch collectors that actually prefer this level of aging, but I'm not one of those people. To me, this actually looks like a sunburn that needs peeling. So I'm going to look to see what other dial options are available. I'll probably end up replacing this dial if I can. Now, I've gone ahead and removed the hour hand with some levers and a piece of plastic, and we'll take the hour hand and we'll set it aside with the other hands in this little protective box here. We'll also put the dial in this box when we remove it. Let's go ahead and remove the movement from the case back, as there's some interesting markings on the back of the case. And if you look at the top, it says LeCoultre, which is the US market import signature. There's also a reference to Brevet, which is their patented waterproof case. And the ACA reference means it was a stainless steel construction. And finally, the 2285 number on the back was the watch reference number. That's one thing I really enjoy about this hobby, is the little clues they left behind so you can see the history of the watch and how it was constructed. Let's take a quick peek at the rear of the movement. And you can see Geneva striping across the bridges. This is a finishing technique which I think is very beautiful. A watchmaker actually spent time polishing these patterns into the bridges. Just very beautiful construction. Now you can see that this watch is held in place to the movement ring with two case screws. But I've noticed that one of the case screws doesn't look original to the watch. It looks like it was replaced at some point by a watchmaker. So as part of this restoration, I purchased a donor movement off of eBay, and it'll be here in a couple days. And the pictures show it has case screws which are identical, and I'll probably use those to replace the case screws that came with the watch. I'd like to try to restore this watch using as many of the original parts as possible. So with the case screws removed, I can remove the dial ring, and that gives me access to the dial screws. And these are located on the side of the movement. And the dial screws press up against feet on the bottom of the dial. And this is what secures the dial to the movement. So what we'll do is we'll loosen these just a little bit. Like I said, that they're very small screws. And once these are loosened, the dial should come away from the movement pretty easily. Let's see how we did here. All right, that's exactly what we want to see here. The dial has some very interesting markings on the back of it. Not sure what they mean. I may take a picture of this and do some research online, but for now, we're going to take the dial and we're going to put it in this protective box with the hands. Always, even with the dial in this condition, we always try to protect it. The dial is the face of the watch. It's what everybody sees, and we really don't want any further damage happening to the dial, especially one this old. Okay, so I flipped the movement back over to the train side, and the first thing that we want to do is to remove the balance assembly, which includes the balance cock, the balance wheel, and then there's a small part called the hairspring, which happens to be the most fragile part of the watch. It also is the component that controls the timing of the watch, so it's really important. And it's really easy to slip with your screwdriver or your tweezers during the disassembly and damage this component. So it's considered a best practice to take this off first and then set it aside somewhere safe. So while I'm tearing down the movement here, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the company. And we'll start with probably the most contentious part is the name of the company. How is it pronounced? And this is one of those brand names that comes up again and again in watch forums, YouTube comments, and other online discussions. And people will often debate the right way to say the name. And depending on where you're from, you'll hear it pronounced different ways. In English-speaking countries, especially in the US, you'll often hear someone say Jaeger-LeCoultre. And this makes sense because many English speakers read Jaeger as if it were German, and it is. It's a German word and it means hunter. But the pronunciation most closely associated with the company is the French-influenced version. So to get it close, you almost have to channel your inner Pepe Le Pew or Inspector Clouseau, using just the right amount of French flair to soften the name, but not so much that it sounds like a comedy sketch. And the company pronunciation, the official pronunciation, is Jaeger-LeCoultre. The first part, Jaeger, is softened with the J sound, just like the middle sound of the word measure. And LeCoultre is also softened with the ending lightly pronounced rather than hit hard like in English. So that's the official way to pronounce the name. However, if you're uncomfortable using your inner French voice and you don't want to butcher the name, you can just say JLC, and no one will think less of you. And since the name itself tells part of the story, this is a good place to take a step back and look where JLC actually came from. The story begins in 1833 in the Swiss Jura Mountains, in a small village called La Sentier, located in the Val d'Ajou. This region will eventually become one of the great centers of Swiss watchmaking, and it's still where JLC is based today. The company traces its origin to Antoine LeCoultre, a gifted inventor and watchmaker who opened a small workshop here. JLC describes that workshop as the beginning of what would eventually become one of the most respected names in Swiss watchmaking. Antoine was not just assembling watches. He had a deep interest in precision, and in 1844, he invented the millionometer. This was an instrument capable of measuring down to the micron. Now that may sound technical, but in watchmaking it was a major step forward because it allowed for smaller and more accurate components, which meant better and more reliable movements. A few years later, in 1847, Antoine developed a keyless winding and setting system. Before this innovation, many watches were wound and set using a separate key. Moving away from that system helped push watch design toward the more modern form we recognize today. Over time, the workshop Antoine founded grew into something larger than a typical watchmaking shop. It became a true manufacturer, meaning a company capable of bringing many watchmaking crafts together under one roof. JLC has emphasized this point in its own history. The firm became known not only for its finished watches, but also for its technical ability to design and produce movements. The second half of the company name came later, with Edmond Jaeger, a French watchmaker and inventor based in Paris. In the early 1900s, Jaeger challenged Swiss watch manufacturers to produce ultra-thin movements, and Antoine's grandson, Jacques-David LeCoultre, accepted that challenge. That partnership combined French design ambition with Swiss manufacturing expertise, eventually giving us the name Jaeger-LeCoultre, a name that reflects the brand's cross-border history and helps explain why the pronunciation still sparks debate today. From here, JLC became one of the most important movement makers in the industry. One of the best examples is the JLC Caliber 920. Introduced in 1967, this ultra-thin automatic movement was supplied to Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron Constantin. It became the foundation for the original Royal Oak, the original Nautilus, and the Vacheron Constantin 222. In other words, one of JLC's movements helped power three of the most important iconic sports watches of the 1970s. One of JLC's most famous creations came in 1931 with the launch of the Reverso. The Reverso was originally designed for polo players who needed a way to protect the fragile glass crystal of their watch during matches. Its clever swiveling case allowed the wearer to flip the watch face over, shielding the dial and crystal from impact. What became as a practical sports watch solution has since become one of the great icons of 20th century watch design. So when we look at this watch on my bench, we're not just looking at a name on a dial. We're looking at nearly 2 centuries of Swiss and French watchmaking history. And that's what makes Jaeger-LeCoultre such a fascinating brand to bring back to life. Now, as usual, I'm just scratching the surface here on the history of the company. There's vast amounts of information available on the history of JLC. So if this is something that you find interesting like I do, I'm going to include some links down in the description below where you can dive into the weeds on the history of JLC. Okay, so let's transition back over to the disassembly. And you can see that I'm almost done finishing up with the keyless works here. Remove the yoke, and that was the setting lever. And now we can turn our attention to the barrel. And I've got this on my block, and what we're going to do is apply some very gentle downward pressure until the barrel lid pops off. And we can remove the barrel lid, and this will give us access to the barrel arbor. The barrel arbor is the metal part in the middle of the barrel, and it's what winds the mainspring when you turn the crown. So once that's removed, we can now take out the hairspring. Now the process that I follow is to remove the first couple of inches of mainspring out of the barrel and then kind of work the mainspring between your fingers and your thumbs, just like this, until the mainspring is completely out of the barrel. Now, this mainspring actually looks like it's in pretty good condition. I could probably reuse this, but I'm not a proponent of that. I always like to replace the mainspring if I can. The reason is you just don't know the condition of the mainspring, how much life has left in it. And you've got the watch completely disassembled. It makes perfect sense to change out the part if you can. All right, so what I'm going to do next is clean the pivots on the gear train wheels. I like to use this product called E-Flex, which is a polishing compound that comes in this small cylindrical base form. And what I do is I stick the E-Flex into my pin vise, and then I push the E-Flex over the pivot and then rotate the E-Flex using my pin vise. And this does a pretty good job of cleaning the pivots. I wouldn't say it's polishing the pivots. really different tools for that. But it's going to remove any dirt, particulates, or dried up oil that have accumulated onto the pivot. We really want to remove that before these parts go into a bath. I've gotten pretty good results with this, so I really like this product. All right, so we're getting to one of my favorite parts of this process, and that's to wash these parts in a bath. I have this little wire mesh basket here, and what I do is I sort out all the parts into these individual baskets. I try to keep similar parts together, so all the gears will go into the larger basket, all the screws will go into another. And then what we need to do is take the movement or the main plate and reinstall the balance assembly. We really don't want the balance assembly to be loose inside the cleaning baskets. The cleaning baskets are rotating, so it'd be very easy for the hairspring to get tangled or to get bent or broken. So the best approach here is just to reinstall this onto the main plate. And then this main plate will go into a dedicated part of the basket, and that will ensure that no other parts bounce into this during the cleaning process. And again, run into that part, which is very delicate, and bend or break something. So we'll place all these smaller baskets into a larger basket, and then we'll attach this to my watch cleaning machine. Now the cleaning machine has 4 cycles. The first cycle is a wash inside of a solvent. There are 2 jars in the back. Those are a rinse solution. And then the last cycle is to dry the parts under a heating element. Now the parts are all clean now. They're out of the wash, and I've got them laid out nice and neat on my bench. And I have to say, this movement is gorgeous. I'm really looking forward to seeing the end result here. So let's go ahead and get started with the reassembly. Okay, let's put a new mainspring into the barrel, but before we put it in, let's put a couple of drops of oil on the inside of the barrel. And this is just to make sure that the mainspring is properly lubricated. Now, I did purchase a new mainspring, as I mentioned earlier in the video. I think this is just a good practice. I don't know the condition of the existing mainspring that came out of the watch, and a new mainspring is going to give the watch the best performance anyway. So if the old mainspring is worn, it's not going to perform as well as a new mainspring. So we'll push that in with some tweezers, and that gives us the stability to add the barrel arbor. I'm using a little pin vise to install this. And once that is in place, we'll test it a few times to make sure the inside of the barrel arbor is catching on to the mainspring. Now, before I put the lid back onto the barrel, I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the top of the barrel arbor, right where it makes contact with the barrel lid. And then we're going to use this little plastic press to put the barrel lid back on. Now, this is a manual wind movement, and the end of the mainspring is shaped like a T. It has these little protruding metal arms, and those arms install into a slot on the inner wall of the barrel, but they also install into these cutouts you see on the barrel lid. So I have to rotate the lid until it lines up with the bridle. And once that's done, I can bring in this little plastic cap and press the barrel lid down onto the barrel. Now, you don't have to use this little press. You can use your tweezers. You can even use your fingers. But I purchased this little contraption a couple years ago, and I've had pretty good results with it. So we'll go ahead and put the barrel arbor onto the main plate. And then what I want to do is prepare the train wheel gears for installation. And I'm going to be using a product called Ep5. Ep5 is a surface treatment used in watchmaking, and it helps control where oil goes. Now, it's important to understand that Ep5 is not a lubricant. It doesn't oil the part by itself. Instead, what it does is it changes the surface of the metal so that oil is less likely to spread from where it's placed. Now, this is very useful on the escapement. The escape wheel has small teeth, and they make contact with the pallet jewels. And we're going to be placing a small amount of oil on those pallet jewels, and we want that oil to stay exactly where we place it. Now, the benefit of doing this is we're going to get a cleaner lubrication. We'll get less drag, and we'll get more consistent performance over time. Now, one place I don't want the epilogue is on the pivots of the escape wheel. That will actually hurt our performance. So what I'm doing here is I'm pressing the pivots on each side of the escapement into this piece of pith wood. And I have to do this gently, but what this is doing is it's removing the epilogue from those pivots. So we can go ahead and start installing the train wheels. And I have to say that one of the things that I really love about this movement is its simplicity. There's a simple elegance to a time-only movement that's hard to overstate. And when I say time-only, what I mean is a watch that focuses on the essentials: hours, minutes, and seconds. I do have watches in my collection that have complications like a date wheel or a day of the week display. But honestly, I found that I rarely bother setting those features when I wear the watch because I just don't use them that often. But what I do use many times throughout the day is the time. And that's what I like about this movement. It does the job, it does it beautifully, and there's just something very satisfying about that. So I'm putting a little bit of oil onto the center wheel, and then we're going to install that into the main plate. And with that installed, we now have our train of wheels in place. Now we can bring in the train wheel bridge, and what I try to do here is line up the jewels on the bridge as closely as possible with the pivots on the gear train. These almost never drop into place perfectly on the first try, so what I'll do is I'll apply some gentle downward pressure on the bridge, and then use my tweezers to carefully guide each pivot into its position. Now, this is one of those steps where having a microscope really helps. At this level of magnification, you can clearly see when the pivot is centered into the jewel. Now, I'm spinning the center wheel here to ensure that the pivots are properly seated, and this free movement tells me that the pivots are in place, the wheels are aligned, and the train is ready for the bridge screws. Now, I have to say, I'm a big believer in using a microscope for watch restorations and watch repair. Being able to see these tiny parts at such a high level of magnification makes steps like this much easier and more controlled. And if you're into this hobby and starting to take it more seriously, a microscope is definitely something worth considering. For me, it's been a complete game changer, not only in the quality of the work, but how much I enjoy the process. So with the bridges installed, we can move on to the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel. And I'll start with the ratchet wheel. The ratchet wheel sits on top of the barrel arbor, and it's held in place by a single screw. And if you recall, the barrel arbor runs through the center of the barrel, and it connects to the inner end of the mainspring. So when the ratchet wheel turns, it also turns the barrel arbor, and that winds the mainspring inside the barrel. And this creates all the power that drives all the gears on the movement. Now we can install the crown wheel. And on this movement, the crown wheel is made up of two separate pieces. The outer ring, which carries the gear teeth, and those teeth engage with the ratchet wheel during winding, and in the center is a stationary piece called the crown wheel core. Now I've already set the outer ring in place, and now I'm adding a small amount of oil on the inner edge of the ring. This is the surface of the ring that will rotate around the crown wheel core. So we want just enough lubrication to let it turn smoothly and reduce the wear between the two parts. Now the crown wheel is held in place by a single screw, but this is a reverse threaded screw. And it's reverse threaded because the crown wheel rotates in a direction that would tend to loosen a normal right-handed threaded screw. So by using a reverse threaded screw, the crown wheel can do its job, and the winding action helps secure the screw instead of backing it out. Now I flip the movement back over to the dial side, and what we're going to do now is install the keyless works and the motion works. And I'm starting with the winding pinion, and I'm adding a little bit of grease to the bottom of the winding pinion where it interacts with the sliding clutch. And we'll go ahead and put the winding pinion in place, and then we can install the sliding clutch, which is sometimes called the sliding pinion. This small part allows the movement to switch between winding the mainspring and setting the hands. When the crown is pushed in, it engages with the winding pinion and transfers the motion to the crown wheel and ratchet wheel to wind the mainspring. And when the crown is pulled out, the clutch shifts position and engages with the motion works. This allows the watch owner to set the hands. Now let's install the cannon pinion. This fits onto the arbor of the center wheel, which we installed from the other side of the movement. Now later on, once the dial and the hands are installed, the minute hand is going to attach to the top of the cannon pinion. But for now, we're going to add a small amount of oil to the posts for the intermediate wheel and the minute wheel. And with those contact points lubricated, we can install the intermediate wheel followed by the minute wheel. Just need to twist this a little bit so the gears line up. Okay, with that done, we can start installing the yoke. But before I put that part on, I want to add a little bit of lubrication onto the post where the yoke installs. And then I'm going to add a little bit of grease onto the sliding clutch. This area on the sliding clutch is where the yoke will make contact. And this is a high friction metal on metal contact point. So I'm using a little thicker grease for this area. So we'll go ahead and bring the yoke in and we'll install it. And once it's installed, we'll go ahead and test this to make sure that the yoke and the sliding clutch will slide up and down. This looks really good. With that done, we can go ahead and install the yoke spring. But before I do, I want to add a little bit of that blue grease where the yoke spring will make contact with the yoke. Now the job of this spring is to hold the yoke under tension. And this helps keep the clutch in the correct position, whether it's in the winding mode or in the time setting mode. Now the yoke spring is held down by a single screw. So we'll go ahead and get that installed. And then we'll tighten that down with our screwdriver. All right, with that done, we can install the setting lever spring. But before I do, I want to clean up a little bit of this grease. I got a little too much between the yoke and the yoke spring, so we'll clean that up with a little bit of Rodico. And then we can bring in the setting lever spring. Now, this doesn't look anything like a spring, but it is. And its job is to add some tension to the setting lever. You see, when you push the crown in or you pull it out, the setting lever moves with the stem, and it helps switch the movement between the winding mode and the time setting mode. Now, the setting lever spring keeps tension on this mechanism, so the crown will stay securely in the correct position instead of moving around loosely. The setting lever spring also gives the crown that positive click feel that you get when you push the crown in or pull it out in between the different time setting and winding positions. Now with the setting lever screwed down, we can go ahead and add a little bit of oil where the setting lever spring comes into contact with the setting lever. Now, this is a metal on metal high friction point, so we're going to be using a little bit of that thicker blue grease again. With those friction points lubricated, I like to install the crown and stem and test the operation of the keyless works. What I'm looking for here is that the sliding clutch moves smoothly into each position and that all the parts engage the way they should. I also like the feel of that nice positive click action you get moving the crown between positions. All right, let's flip the movement back over to the other side, and let's get the pallet fork and the pallet bridge installed. We are very close to being able to test to see if this watch will actually run. And this is one of the final steps before we'll install the balance wheel. And we'll see if we can get the heartbeat going on this watch again. Now, when you're installing the pallet fork and the bridge, the important thing here is to make sure that the pivots line up into the jewels. The pallet fork has two pivots on the top and bottom, and they're very tiny. And if I don't get this lined up properly, I can bend or break those pivots when I tighten down the bridge. So what I do here is I bring in the screw, and then I have this little tool that I use, you see on the left here, and I apply a little bit of pressure down on the bridge as I'm tightening the screw down. And this just ensures that the pivot doesn't slip out. And then what I can do is test the pallet fork to make sure it snaps back and forth. and the pivots are floating freely in the jewels. And this brings us to the moment of truth. We'll see if this watch will run again. So we'll bring in the balance wheel and the balance cock, and then we'll install this at just the right angle. This is a bit like turning the keys on your ignition to make sure the engine will run again. And there's a lot of things that I love about this hobby, but this is one of my favorite steps in the process, is installing the balance wheel to see if this will fire up. So we'll get the pivots aligned. And oh man, haha, I love it. This is great. This is the best feeling, seeing this spin up and spin up with pretty good amplitude. Now with the watch running again, we can turn our attention to oiling the jewels. And this is important as we want to protect the moving parts, reduce friction, and it will improve the overall performance of the movement. Now, what I'm doing here is lubricating one of the jewels for the balance staff. This watch uses a shock protection system for the balance staff. The upper and lower balance jewels are each made up of two parts, a cap jewel, and then there's a hole jewel which sits inside this brass setting you see here, and this is called a chaton. Now what I've done is placed a small drop of oil onto the cap jewel, and then I carefully placed the chaton with the hole jewel back on top of it. Now once the jewel assembly is lubricated and put back together, we can reinstall this into the movement. Now this jewel setting is held in place by a small shock spring. And on this watch, this spring is part of a KIF-style shock protection system. Now, KIF was introduced in the 1940s as an alternative to another protection system called Incablock, which had become earlier in the 1930s and had become more widely recognized. Both systems were designed to solve the same problem, protecting the balance staff from damage, but KIF gave watch manufacturers another high-end quality option. And over time, it was used by more high-end brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, Omega, Longines, and JLC. So while this is a very small part, this little spring and the jewel setting play a very important role in protecting one of the most fragile areas of the movement. Now I'm going to lubricate the gear train, and to do this I'll place a very small amount of oil into each jewel on the train wheel bridge. The goal here is just to use enough oil to lubricate the pivot without flooding the jewel. Too much oil can actually hurt the performance of the watch, and excess oil can spread to places it doesn't belong, attract dust and debris, and over time it can even cause problems inside the movement. So once I lubricate the movement, I let it run for a day, and now I want to test the performance of the movement on my Timegrapher. The Timegrapher is a bit like an EKG for a watch. It uses a very sensitive microphone to listen to the sounds made by the escapement, and from those sounds it can tell me how the movement is performing. The rate shows whether the watch is gaining or losing time. The amplitude tells me how far the balance wheel is rotating. The beat error shows whether the balance is swinging evenly in both directions, and the beat rate tells me how many beats the movement makes per hour. All of this information helps me understand how healthy the movement is and whether I need to make any adjustments. Now I've made some adjustments so the watch is not gaining or losing time now. I'm a little disappointed in the amplitude here. It's a little lower than where I'd like it. I'd like to see it in the 250 to 270 range. However, I'm not going to let perfection stand in the way of progress. Now this watch has a center sweep seconds hand on the dial, and the hand is powered by a separate driving wheel that mounts onto an extended pivot of the third wheel on the gear train. It needs to be installed carefully and evenly, so I'm using my hand press here to gently push the driving wheel down onto the pivot. Now the press gives me much better control than trying to do this by hand, and it makes sure that the wheel sits straight without putting uneven pressure on the pivot. Now the driving wheel engages with this very small seconds pinion, and before we install it, I'm going to add a tiny amount of oil just below the head of the pinion, right where it makes contact with the center wheel. But you can see that the pinion has a long extended shaft, and that shaft passes through the hollow center of the center wheel and comes up through the middle of the dial. Now later on, when we install the center seconds hand, it's going to attach to the top of the shaft, and this is going to allow the seconds hand to sweep around the dial. Now you can see that I'm installing a small spring over the center seconds pinion. This spring applies just a slight amount of friction to the pinion, and this helps keep the seconds hand moving smoothly. Without this spring, the seconds hand could flutter or show a little backlash as it moves around the dial. And it's held in by a single screw, so we'll install the screw and then we'll tighten it down with our screwdriver. Now it's time to reinstall the dial, but before I do, I wanted to take a moment to show you the replacement dial I'll be using. Now, when I was searching for a donor movement, I found one that came with a dial that closely matched the original dial from this watch. But as you can see, the donor dial is in much better condition than the one that came with the watch. Now, for some vintage watch collectors, changing the dial can be a controversial decision. But for me, this one was pretty easy. I do want to point out that this replacement dial is not perfect. If you look across the top of the dial, you can see some visible damage. And this could be caused by moisture intrusion, surface oxidation, or possibly a breakdown of the protective lacquer over time. So this is not flawless by any means. But to my eyes, this is still a much more attractive option than the original dial that came with the watch. And since it matches the original design, I feel comfortable moving forward with it. Now, before we put the dial on, we need to install one more wheel, and that's the hour wheel, which goes over the cannon pinion and engages with the minute wheel. It rotates once every 12 hours, and it's what the hour hand will install onto. And then we put this dial washer on, and then we can bring in our dial. Now, the underside of this dial has two metal feet that protrude out, and those install into the movement. But once those dial feet install into the movement, we can turn the movement on its side and tighten the dial screws, which press up against those dial feet. And those secure the dial to the face of the movement. So there's two of these. There's one on each side. So we'll get this one tightened down. And then we're going to rotate this to the other side and do the same thing. All right, this is looking really good. Now, before we install the hands, I wanted to take a moment to show you the set that came with the donor movement. Just like the replacement dial, these hands are in a much better condition than the original set that came with the watch. Now, these are gold instead of silver, so they're not an exact match to the original set, but I actually think the gold hands will look much better against this dial. Now, even though this is a small departure from the original look, I've decided to use these hands for the final assembly. Now we're going to install the hour hand first, and I'm using the hand press again so I can install the hand evenly and with good control. Once the hour hand is in place, I'll pull the crown out and rotate the hand all the way around the dial. Now while I'm doing that, I'm also going to hold the movement at a slight angle so I can check the hand from the side. What I'm looking for here is that the hand sits level, it runs parallel to the dial, and doesn't make contact with the dial surface as it moves around. Now we're going to repeat this same process with the minute hand. For this step, I want both hands aligned exactly at the 12 o'clock position. Now this makes sure that the hour and minute hands are properly synchronized, so they line up with the hour markers at the correct time. Now, if the hands are off even slightly, you'll notice it later when the minute hand reaches 12 o'clock, but the hour hand is not pointing cleanly at the next hour marker. Once the hands are aligned, we can press the minute hand into position. And then we'll rotate the hands through a full 12-hour cycle to make sure everything is moving correctly. What I'm checking for here is that the hands stay parallel to each other and never come into contact as they travel around the dial. If there's any interference between the hands, this is the time to catch it and to make adjustments before moving on. That looks good. Now we can install the seconds hand. This is one of the trickier steps because both the seconds pinion and the hole in the hand are extremely small. Unfortunately, I can't really use the microscope for this step because the hand press is blocking my view. So instead, I'm using my eye loupe to get enough magnification to see what I'm doing. But even under heavy magnification, this still takes a steady hand. You have to carefully line up the hole in the seconds hand with the tiny seconds pinion before pressing it into place. So it looks like we have a little problem here. When I press the seconds hand into place, it should have started rotating right away, but that didn't happen here. That tells me the hand is not gripping the seconds pinion properly. It looks like the hole in the seconds hand is just slightly too large, so it's not fitting tightly onto the pinion, it's slipping. So to fix this, we're going to tighten the hand tube using my staking set. Now when I place the seconds hand on the anvil, you can see that it has become magnetized. So I'll need to address that. But first, I need to close the hole on the hand tube just slightly so it will grip the seconds pinion properly. To do that, I'm using a stake with a specially shaped tip. The goal here is not to crush the tube, but to reduce the opening by a very small amount. Now I gave this a few light taps with the hammer, and we'll test fit it again to make sure it grips the pinion. Now magnetism is not a good thing in watchmaking. It can affect the performance of a watch and have a real impact on its timing. So before the seconds hand goes back on the movement, I need to demagnetize it. To do that, I'm using my Horology demagnetizer. I place the seconds hand in the small padded holder, and I'm setting it in the detector zone. The indicator shows that the hand is still magnetized, so it needs to be demagnetized before it goes back on the watch. Now I move the seconds hand over to the demag zone, and I'll run it through a demag cycle. This takes a few seconds to complete, but this tool does a really good job of removing magnetism from small watch parts. And when it's done, we'll move it back over to the detect zone and see how we did. And look here. There's nothing to report. Problem solved. I reinstalled the seconds hand off camera, and now it fits perfectly on the seconds pinion. So with that done, we can turn our attention to the case. There really isn't anything wrong with the case aside from a few nicks, bumps, and scratches. And those are expected with a vintage watch like this. However, I do want to see if I can remove some of the smaller surface scratches. To do that, I'm using a polishing compound called Flitz, which is designed for polishing stainless steel surfaces like this. I've applied a small amount of Flitz to this cloth, and now I'm working it gently into the surface of the case. I've sped up the footage here so you don't have to watch me do this in real time, but the goal here isn't to make the case look brand new, but just to reduce some of the lighter surface scratches while preserving the overall character of the watch. Now that the case polishing is complete, I'm going to wash the case parts in the ultrasonic cleaner. This helps remove any remaining polishing compound, along with any dirt or other small particulates that may still be on the case. I usually run the ultrasonic for about 15 minutes, depending on the condition of their parts. I let the case dry out for a couple hours, and now we can install a brand new crystal. For this, I'm going to be using my crystal press. I've installed a set of dies that are close in size to the outside and inside edges of the crystal. The idea here is to use the press to slightly compress the crystal temporarily, reducing its circumference just enough so that it can fit inside the case. Now once the pressure is released, the crystal is going to expand slightly and create a nice firm fit against the inside of the case. Just like this. Okay, we are on the home stretch now, and it is time to recase the movement. I'm going to start by blowing a little air on the inside of the crystal. And for anyone who's ever cased up a watch, you know that there's almost nothing worse than finding dust or lint trapped inside the crystal after you've closed everything up. It can definitely be a triggering experience. Now we need to get the dial and the movement centered and properly seated inside the case. And once that's done, we can bring in the movement ring. The movement ring helps hold the movement securely inside the case, and it keeps everything centered and properly aligned, especially the stem, crown, dial, and hands. It also helps adapt smaller movements to a larger case, which is definitely the situation here. Now in this watch, the movement ring also supports the case screws. The screws tighten against the movement ring rather than the case itself. So without the movement ring, the movement could shift or rotate inside the case, which would cause alignment problems or even damage. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm using the case screws for my donor movement. They appear to be the correct original style screws for this movement, so I'll go ahead and tighten them down. Now we can close up the case by installing the case back. This watch has a water-resistant snap-on case back, and I'm going to be using my crystal press to install it. I've installed a couple of different size dies here to support the watch while I press the case back into place. And I'm using the press because I want to apply a very controlled, even pressure to the case back. And once the case back snaps into place, we can release the pressure and then take a moment. Oh man, this looks great. I tell you what, let's put a strap on this and see how it looks on the wrist. All right, here it is. I put a brand new alligator strap on this and I think this looks fantastic. I am excited to add this watch to my collection. I'm excited to wear it. There's just one thing to say about this.
I like it a lot.
Thank you, Lloyd. Not sure I could have said that any better. All right, everyone. This has been a lot of fun. One of my favorite restorations so far. I hope you enjoyed it too. Please click that like and subscribe button and turn on notifications so you know when I post new content. I do have more projects in the works, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.